You ever watch a video and you're like, man, I really wish I knew what camera, what lens, what lighting gear they use, and you try to find some BTS footage so you can kind of get a glimpse of what's going on, but you really can't? Well, now you can. Because I used to be a DP before I was a director, and I made this course about 2 years ago that I was used to charge people for, where I broke down the lighting in some commercials and music videos I made, and now it's right here on YouTube for free, just for you. Keep watching. Hi, how are you? Welcome to this micro course. I'm going to show you how I lit these three scenes. One's a scene from a web commercial, one's from a television commercial, and one is from a music video. There's even a bonus in there as well. I'm going to break these down. I'm going to talk about the gear that we used and the lighting. You know, I know that you care about equipment, but the honest truth is you could have used any variety of different lights to make these shots. It's more about the reasons why we decided to place the lights where we did and what that means for the shot. So without further ado, let's jump right in and start breaking these down. Before we break down these lighting setups, let's talk about something that's really important and something that you should be doing if you're looking to become better at cinematography or as a shooter, and that's gathering reference images. Reference images are a good starting point. Obviously, you're not trying to copy someone's shot. You're just using it for inspiration and to get some ideas. And it's also helpful to share reference images with the other people that you're working at so that they have an idea of what you're thinking for your shot, whether you're a director or a cinematographer. So when I'm looking for reference images, I like to search in a couple of different places. ShotDeck is probably one of the best resources to look at. Unfortunately, ShotDeck is not free. You can do I believe, 7 or 14-day trial of ShotDeck, but basically it's a repository of lots of different still images from lots of different films. And what's great about ShotDeck is, one of the things that we're going to be breaking down is the interrogation scene that I shot for a commercial. I can type in interrogation scene into ShotDeck, and it will populate my screen with lots of different interrogation scenes from different films. And then I can start pulling those for reference. Obviously, like I said, the downside of ShotDeck, if you're trying to, if you don't have a lot of money and you're trying to, get by without having to spend money, is I believe it costs about $99 a year. You can also use Google, do a good old Google image search and see what you can come up with there. You can use another website, which I really like. It's called FilmGrab. The problem with FilmGrab is you don't have that search functionality where you can just say, hey, show me interrogation scenes. You'd have to know, you'd have to kind of know what movies had interrogation scenes and then search by movie or search by director or search by cinematographer and then pull that up. So, an example, for some reason for me, the interrogation scene that always comes to mind is The Usual Suspects. And that has a very specific look to it, a very stylized look. And I always think of that when I think of interrogation scenes. If I go onto ShotDeck, I can search interrogation scene and that will come up. If I go into FilmGrab, I'm going to have to go search for The Usual Suspects to kind of get some reference images for that. The other thing you can do is use Pinterest. That's another great option for gathering references for yourself. And the other option, if you don't want to do any of those, is you can go to stock websites. So Shutterstock, Adobe Stock, Envato Elements, Storyblocks. There's lots of different ones, and some of them you do not have to be a member of or a paying member of to search for images and to download previews. So Shutterstock is a good example. You can go on Shutterstock, which is probably like the world's largest stock library. And you can start pulling reference images. You can save them as preview files. Yeah, they'll be watermarked and they'll be small, but they're still good to share and to use as a reference. So that's another thing that you can do. And then, of course, you're going to want to organize all of this and present it in some way. I use Canva, which is another paid tool. You could easily create a Google Doc, set up a table, and pull these images in with some notes next to each one that you could present to a client or to a producer or to your team. So gathering references is a great way to start. And if I were you, that's where I'd be starting. And even if I'm not you, I'm me, that's where I'm starting. And I do this for a living, so you should take my advice and you should get reference images for yourself. All right, we're going to start here with this first shot for a commercial that I shot, I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago, 2018. And this is for a product called Atrantil. I'm the director of photography on this one. And this is what I like to refer to as an SSS, which stands for situation shot. And throughout your career, if you're a cinematographer or just a shooter, you're going to get put into positions where a producer or a client or a director is going to ask you to get a shot, and it's not going to be ideal conditions. You know, maybe it's outside at the worst time of day. Maybe it's in a room where you can't turn the existing house lights off. Maybe it's in a room that's too small or that has some kind of other issue. That's a situation shot, and you're going to have to figure out how to make it look good. So I included this shot for you, not because it's amazing cinematography, but because I found myself in a situation and I had to figure out how I was going to make this shot look good. And what's about it is that we've got a woman sitting on a yoga mat in the middle of a street, not a real street, but I'll explain that. And there are cars, some of them are SUVs going by. So I've got to figure out how to get consistent light on her to make this look nice, because this is for a commercial. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to run this image on a loop for you so that you can watch it a couple of times. I'd like this to be a little interactive. So I want you to watch it, think about it, try to make an educated guess as to how I lit it, write that down, and then jump to the next video where I break it down for you. Okay, so hopefully you watched that spot a few times and you wrote down a guess, or you typed out a guess, and you think you have an idea how I did it. Now, this commercial is about this woman who finds herself in the wrong place. She's doing yoga in the wrong place, in traffic. She's dressed as a businesswoman, and she's in a biker bar. It doesn't make sense to me, but it doesn't need to. When I'm the director of photography, I just need to make it look good. And eventually she does end up doing yoga in the right place, which is how we ended the spot. So let's talk about this shot and how we did it. We've got the element of cars going by. And because we're putting the actress in danger, it's kind of like an unwritten rule that I've got to man up there. Well, is that a sexist term? You decide. I'm going to be there in the middle of the road with her. So I'm a few feet away from her. We're shooting this on a red Epic Dragon. I believe we used Rokinon lenses. This kit was my gaffer's. His name is Sean Schaefer. And he's also there with me because we are bouncing natural light for this scene. So if that's what you wrote down, if that's what your guess was, you were right. I had the good fortune of knowing the studio very well because I shoot there often enough, but also having a little scout day where I got to take out my camera and look in this driveway and kind of figure out what's going to make the best angle for this shot. And unfortunately, it was an overcast day, so I didn't get to kind of see where the sun was. But I have technology on my side. I broke out my iPhone. Sun Surveyor is the app that I use to plot the course of the sun throughout the day. I don't plot it. The app does. But it tells me where the sun's going to rise and then, its trajectory throughout the day. So I knew that the sun was going to be coming up behind where I wanted to place the actress. And that sun would be a nice backlight for her. And then easily enough, we can just take a 4x4 beadboard and bounce light back in to fill her in. And that's how we did it. So me and my gaffer are both there in between the cars with her. I'm using a Dana dolly. If you're not familiar with the Dana dolly, it's just like a slider, only it's bigger. It's like a skateboard wheels on some metal pipes, and it takes heavier cameras. It's not motorized or anything like that. So I'm kind of crouched on the ground, and I'm pushing the Dana dolly in and pulling my focus at the same time. Wasn't room for an AC to be there on the road with us. And then my gaffer, Sean, he's also named Sean, is standing behind me with the 4x beadboard, and he's giving her sun. We had to do a fair number of takes for this because, each time we did a take, we had to reset the cars. We had to get the speed right. They kind of have to turn at the end. There was also real traffic coming in and out of the parking lot that we had to deal with. But we ended up getting the shot, and we did it all with natural light. Um, I'm going to give you a quick bonus because we've got some time here. The very next setup was maybe, 100, no, maybe not 100, but maybe 50 yards away from this spot, where we had two cars and one was on fire and one wasn't. And we have actual firemen from the East Hanover Department, East Hanover Fire Department. I think that's the town we were in New Jersey, who were there on set to put out the fire on the wrong car. It's all part of this commercial that I don't understand. But at this point, we've already, spent some time early in the morning getting the first shot with the cars. So, we're starting to fight the sun, at the point where it's getting a little bit high. So what I decided to do, just to balance everything out here, the sun was a little bit too hard on the two firefighters. So I had my crew build a 12 by to table over them. So if I say 12 by and you're like, what is this guy talking about? I'm talking about a frame that's 12 by 12 or 12 feet by 12 feet. And the frame is skinned with a rag or diffusion that lets light through it. So as that sunlight hits it, and when I say it's tabled, I mean it's right over top of them, flat to them, so that the sun is hitting that and then softening out. And also, we're losing some stops of sun through that diffusion, and then it's evening out the light that's on the firefighters so that we get a nice exposure on them and that they're not too bright. So that's how I lit that one. That's a little bonus there, sneaky bonus for you. Sorry to give you the chance to guess that one, but that's how we did it.
I want you to take a good hard look at these photos.
This one's my favorite.
You think this is a joke? You did this.
Well, I'm fungus. That's what I do.
Let's talk about nail fungus. Now, I don't know about you, but if I had nail fungus, I'm going to the doctor. I am not using some internet cream on my nails. But anyway, this is a commercial for the web for a product called Fungaway. And back in 2017, I was approached by an agency that I had never worked with before who saw some of my other work, and they said, here's probably their worst performing product and a very small budget, and they asked me to make this commercial. So this is what we did. We, when I say we, I really mean me, because I had to be the director, the DP, the art department, the editor. I did have some help. I had a makeup artist who turned the actor Chaka De Silva, a good friend of mine, into fungus. And I had a couple of other people on hand while we were actually shooting to give me a hand. But for the most part, I had to be in charge of the entire look and feel. And I picked this for that reason, because I don't mean to presume, but you might be in a similar situation where you are kind of like a one-man band or one-woman band, and you're doing a lot of these things yourself. And you might also not have a great budget for them. Now, for this, it worked out because, 5 years later, I work for this agency on a weekly basis, whether I'm directing, shooting, or editing television commercials. It was worth the gamble that I took on this commercial to not make a lot on this and kind of do it as a test to see if I could continue to work with them. Now, some of the limitations that we had here was that we are in the basement of the log cabin that I was living in at the time in upstate New York. And we've got really low ceilings. I'm about 6 feet tall, and I could put my hand up and touch the ceiling, so it's probably less than 8 feet. And we've only got two walls to shoot against. These two walls that you see in the shot are the only two walls we can shoot against. We can't put the camera on the other side of the table where fungus is and shoot her singles, because behind her is just basement stuff. So that wouldn't work. So we've got to be creative with our blocking. And when I see creative, it's not really creative at all. She's just walking around to the other side of the table and joining him later in the commercial. That's how we get around the fact that we only have two walls to shoot with. Now, I really did want to sell the illusion that this was some kind of a jail or prison interrogation room. So to do that, I did a couple of things. Number one, I put some bars, which were really just some pipes, on this window that's visible in some of these wider shots. So it looks like we're in a jail. I have this old table at the house, and I got a $2 door handle at Home Depot, screwed it into the table so that his handcuffs could be attached to the table. And then the last thing that I did is, towards the top of the commercial, you see this shot where it looks like we're outside of the room and we're looking in through a window or the window in a door to make the room seem like it's really there and it's bigger than it is. And that illusion is really just done by taking a C-stand and putting a piece of plexiglass and a pair of old window blinds in front of my camera to make it look like I'm outside and shooting in. So that's the magic of filmmaking. You've got to think about those kind of things when you're setting up these kind of projects for yourself. So take a good look at the frame. You've been seeing a lot of these images now as I've been talking, and it should be pretty obvious how this was done, how this was lit. But write it down, and then we'll see how you did in the next video. Welcome back. If you said top light, you got it, A+. So we did top light for this. It's what most interrogation scenes, if you watch a lot of different references, you'll see a lot of top light. And I didn't want to be any different. Top light worked perfectly here. This is 2017, so I'm using an older light that probably doesn't exist. You probably never heard of it. It's by a company called Owzel Digital, and it's their drum light. Cost me about $200 at the time, and I got a lot of great use out of this light. It's got a bunch of daylight balanced bulbs inside of it, and because as I mentioned, the ceiling is very low, the light fixture is right on top of these actors. And when you have a bigger, softer source, right, you want to get it close to your actors because that's going to help the light wrap around their faces better. That's going to help soften out the shadows. That's going to make a better gradation between the light and the shadows on their face. So in this scene where the actress who's playing the cop doing the interrogation is leaning in to speak to our criminal, she's leaning in because she can't stand up there. The light is right on top of her head. If she stood up, she'd bang into it. So that's how close it is to the actors, and that's what's kind of giving them a nice soft look. Now, you can run into issues with top light. You're going to get shadows under the nose, under the chin. If you have an actor or actress who has eyes that are deep set in their face, you could get some shadows here too. And the way around that is to not cast those actors. Just kidding. The way to get around that is to use an eye light to soften those out. Now, if you don't have an Owzel Digital drum light, why not? If you don't have an Owzel Digital drum light, you can probably use anything else that you have, like aperture lights with soft boxes. You can boom them above to use as a top light. You could take any other kind of hard light and you could put it through some kind of 4x or 6x frame so that it gets softer as it comes through and is kind of closer to the actors. You can use a China ball or a paper lantern. Aperture makes some cool lanterns now for some of their lights. You might run into a problem that I had, which was the drum light has light coming out of the bottom, but also the sides. And we want to control that. We don't want light coming out of the sides and spilling and bouncing. So to control that, we do what's called skirting the light, which means we're taking some black fabric like duvetine and we're putting it around the sides of the light so that light cannot escape from the sides and it's just coming straight down onto our subjects. Now the wall behind our actor is boring. It's just a gray wall that I painted. So I put a 1K tungsten light through an old piece of cardboard, like a cardboard box piece of cardboard that I just cut some slits into, and that gives it this breakup pattern that's on the wall behind him. So that's a little more visually interesting to look at. And then we've got one window down in the basement that has some natural light coming through it. I put a piece of burlap outside of that window. Now burlap's like a thick material, and it's acting as diffusion because I didn't want a lot of ambience, natural ambience coming through that window. I really wanted to have control here over everything that I'm doing in terms of lighting. We shot this with the Blackmagic Ursa Mini Pro Generation 1. That was, in 2017 when I shot this, it was like a brand new camera that I had just got. And at the time I was shooting with Rokinon primes. We also tried to add some atmosphere to this shot. In the atmosphere that I'm talking about is fog. Now, in the next breakdown, we're really going to talk about atmosphere there and the difference between fog and haze. But just know that in this one, we used a very cheap fog machine. It's not consistent as you watch through the commercial. You'll see it in some shots. You won't really see it in others. But the big problem with fog is that it doesn't settle. It curls and swirls and twists and twirls. Wow, that's good. It's always moving, and that's not really what you want. But, hey, this was a low-budget spot. So if you said top light, I want to congratulate you. You got it right. I think it should have been obvious. And we're going to jump into the next shot after this, where we're going to look at something from a music video that's very, very different setup from this. Okay, here is the third and final shot that I'm going to break down for you. This one is not a commercial. It's a music video for a country music artist named Jessica Lynn. I work with her very often. This is the fourth music video I've made for her. Two of the other videos have been on country music television. And by the time you're watching this one, well, who knows? You might be watching this in the far future, but this one's also on country music television. So this one is being shot in a Airbnb in upstate New York, kind of like an old house that was built in the late 1800s. And this shot is in the library. We are shooting at night. And you're probably looking at it and you're saying, wow, it looks good. You're right. Actually, you're probably saying to yourself, it looks like there was a lot of art department stuff going on here in this library. But guess what? There wasn't. This is literally, we walked into the library and this is how it looked. From the books on the shelves to the couches to the chessboard. We didn't touch anything because it just looked kind of perfect. And I think that's one of the reasons why she selected this location for the music video. Now, as you look at the image, you're probably noticing that there's a lot of atmosphere. And when I say atmosphere, I mean there's a lot of haze. You can see it in, you can see it catching in the lamp lights and stuff like that. It's there. And it's what's helping to kind of reduce the contrast and make it look really nice. Now, I don't want to give too much else away. So now you know there is some atmosphere there, but it's your job now to watch this frame for a few seconds and try to take a stab at how we lit this. Write it down and let's see how you did in the next video. I know you're going to do good on this one. I got a good feeling that maybe you didn't get the first one or the second one. If you didn't get the second one, I don't know. Maybe you shouldn't be a cinematographer. I shouldn't say that. You can still be a cinematographer. But this one, you're going to figure this one out. Maybe. And if you don't, it's not a big deal. It's not like it's not a quiz or a test or anything. You're not getting a grade. No judgments. Let's start with the atmosphere because I think that's important. It was an important part of this shoot. We wanted to haze up all the different shots that we were doing in the interiors. And as I play through a couple of them here, you see we went pretty heavy on the haze. And haze and fog are two different things. And I don't want you to get confused because you can go to Party City or a store like that or Amazon and you can get a fog machine and some fog fluid, relatively inexpensively. But fog is not the same as haze because when you use fog, it doesn't settle. It moves and it swirls. And that's not what you want. You want haze or a hazer because haze settles and it just sits and it looks beautiful. You can get haze in a can. And I've been on shoots where we've used haze in a can and that works. Of course, the cans are expensive and once you run out of the can, then you don't have haze. You can also get a hazer. Some of them are very expensive. The one that we used for this video, the artist bought herself. And I believe she said she paid $400 or $500 for it. Definitely a good investment, I would say. I'm probably going to buy the same one. It's water-based, and it doesn't take long to get it going and to get some haze. And then you kind of have to waft it into where you want it to go, wait a few seconds for it to settle, and then you can shoot. Now, in terms of the lighting here in the library, we are using an IntelliTech Light Cloth 2.0. This belongs to my gaffer, Derek. And basically, it's like a huge, very thin, it's a cloth, right? It's flexible, it's foldable. It's made by a company called IntelliTech. And it's about, don't quote me on the dimensions, but I believe it's about 3 feet by 4.5 feet. So it's pretty big. And you can see it in this behind the scenes footage here. That's her key. We also have a bunch of practicals. There are a bunch of lamps that were there in the library. And we swapped out some of the bulbs for some tungsten bulbs that Derek brought with him, and he also has them on a dimmer so that he can dim the level on those lights. And then in the far back of the library, we have a Light Panels Gemini 2x1, and that's an RGBW light, so that means it can do all the different colors. And we've got that set to like something called like a midnight blue gel coming through that window, looking kind of like moonlight raking across the back wall over those books in the back. So we've got the camera's an Ursa Mini Pro Generation 1. We're using Sigma Cine primes. I believe this is either on the 18 to 35 or the 50 to 100. We did both here. And there's Glimmer Glass, which is it's basically something you put in your matte box. It's a piece of glass. It's kind of similar to like a Hollywood Black Magic or a Black Promise, which is very popular. It softens skin tones a little, and it gives some halation to, you know, like lights and things like that, practicals that are visible in your scene. So when you couple that with the haze, you're reducing contrast and you're getting a really nice soft look, which is really important to the client in this situation. She wanted everything to look really soft, her skin to look really soft. So the IntelliTech light cloth is doing all the work. It's actually a really cool light because it's so small profile that you can, you know, if you don't have a lot of room, you can get it wedged into small spaces or even like gaff tape it up to a wall or a ceiling to get some light. It's comparable to something like, I'm going to show some behind the scenes of what's lighting me right now. I'm being lit by an Aperture 600D. That's in a Godox softbox, which is like a 2x3 softbox. And that's not quite soft enough for what I wanted for my key. So I'm pushing that through a 4x4 frame of half grid diffusion. So the light cloth itself is basically like the thickness of this 4x4 diffusion that the light is pushing through lighting me. So it's really small profile and it's actually really cool. I'm definitely thinking about picking one up for myself in the future. So that's how we lit this library shot. And hopefully, you know, you didn't have to say IntelliTech light cloth to be right, but you basically needed to know that we used a very large soft source camera left to get that nice soft light on her. Good job. I know you got this one. Okay. You watch the 3 breakdowns and you're like, okay, why is there another video? Well, this is where we talk about equipment, because you might have been watching these breakdowns and saying to yourself, I don't have all this equipment. I don't have all these stands. I don't have an IntelliTech light cloth. I don't have top lights. And that's completely understandable. You know, I had to make a decision because I live in a fairly remote part of New York, upstate. There's no rental houses nearby. It would not make sense for every time I had a shoot for me to drive all the way into New York City to rent equipment, do my shoot the next day, the following day drive all the way back. It's not worth it, you know, just because of the price of gas and everything else on top of all that. So I'm someone who owns a lot of equipment, and yeah, it's a rabbit hole. Once you start buying equipment and go down that rabbit hole, you can keep spending and spending and spending, and you know, the jobs get bigger and you need more gear, and you know, it never stops. So I'm not saying go out and buy a ton of gear, but what I am saying is you can still create some really nice images using some budget gear or harnessing artificial light. So here are some ideas for you. If you are looking for gear and you don't want to spend tons of money, then there are a couple of brands that I would recommend you look at. The first is Aperture. Now Aperture, comparatively against what traditionally some of these lights would cost, I think they're relatively inexpensive, and they're also very good. So you should definitely look into that if you haven't already. I'm sure you probably own some lights by Aperture. There are a bunch of brands who are making lights that are similar to what Aperture does. I don't know if they're any cheaper or any better, but Godox is a similar brand that makes lights that are similar to Aperture lights. And then if you shop for Adorama is a big store that sells camera stuff in New York City, but they ship everywhere. They brand Godox stuff as Flashpoint. So you could also shop there, so you can get stands and things like that that are still good quality but are cheaper than you'd pay for other like well-known brands. Like if you buy a Flashpoint C stand, you might spend $125. If you buy a Matthews C stand, you spend $275. So you can save some money there. And one other brand to look at is GVM. I think it stands for Great Video Maker. I've got a couple of their lights, and they're not bad at all. You can start there. The other thing that you can do is you can use household items like a white tablecloth for diffusion. So we have all sorts of different rags that we use, muslins and magic cloth and grids and things like that. And they're nice, and they do a good job of diffusing light and making it softer. But if you don't have access to that, you can use a shower curtain. You can use a white tablecloth. You can use anything that's white and soft. You might have, depending upon what you're using, you might have some color shifts. Like if you're using a tablecloth that's a little bit yellow and not quite white, that's going to change the color falling on your subject a little bit. But if you need to soften out light, using that is going to be better than not using that, I think. You can go to your dollar store and you can pick up things like clothespins and felt pads and all sorts of different things that you can use to enhance your filmmaking. You can practice using natural light, setting up near windows, diffusing that light with shears or curtains or something like that. There's lots of different things that you can do. You don't need to feel limited by the fact that you don't have tons of lights. Yes, it's nice to have a lot of equipment, but at the same time, it's also a headache because you've got to take care of that equipment. You've got to make sure it doesn't break, but eventually it does break, and then you've got to replace it. And, spending all that money on equipment is taking away money that you could be making for yourself instead of kind of just spending for the business. So, do what you need to do, but know that there are ways around, and you don't have to be limited by not having all these lights. You can definitely find ways around it, or you can just buy a couple of, you can either spend money on some really good stuff or, like one or two really good lights. I love my Light Panels Gemini 2x1. It's $4,000 light, but it's absolutely awesome. I could use that as a key for everything. Or you can get yourself a bunch of cheaper Aperture Godox lights so that you have more variety of hard lights and soft lights and things to use for your shoots. And good luck. Well, look at you. You made it all the way to the end. Well, I hope you're hydrated. I hope you took some bathroom breaks. I hope you learned something. I'd love some feedback, whether it's positive or negative, whether there's some other things that you'd be interested in seeing in these classes, more detail, less detail, more of me, less of me, probably. I've got a YouTube channel. I've got lots of other courses, so check them out and keep learning.